When I was a kid, my two younger siblings and I stayed the weekend at our grandmother's house while our parents were out of town. My grandma's long-term boyfriend, let's call him Banks, had moved in with her and would be staying the weekend with us as well. The moment I met this guy, he immediately gave me the creeps. I don't remember much from our first night there, so I assume nothing out of the ordinary happened. That quickly changed the next morning, though. My grandma announced she'd be leaving us at home with Banks for a bit so she could pick up some groceries. As grandma left, my brother, sister, and I sat on the living room couch watching TV. Shortly thereafter, I heard Banks come out from his bedroom down the hall. I listened closely to Banks' footsteps as he approached and noticed that he was more so slowly creeping down the hallway as opposed to walking. I fixated on the doorway where he'd inevitably appear, and when he did, he was crouched down, eyes wide and grinning with his hands positioned as if he was about to pounce towards us. He began running towards the couch and yelling, "I'm the tickle monster," then jumped on top of my younger sister, aggressively tickling her while kneeling over her on the couch. For reference, Banks is over 6 feet tall. He's muscular for an old guy, and my sister was under the age of 10 at that point. My sister repeatedly asked Banks to stop, exclaiming, "I don't like it. Stop that." My sister eventually let out a high-pitched scream and began to hysterically cry. At this point, as her older brother, I intervened. It sounded like Banks was hurting her, and I didn't like that he was continuing to tickle her while she screamed and cried for him to stop. I tried inserting myself between my sister and Banks and told him more firmly to stop. He wouldn't remove his hands from my sister, though. That's when I began slapping Banks' arms, telling him to let go of her. And once he released his grip, I screamed, "Run," to both of my siblings. The only thing I remember feeling or thinking in this moment was, get the fuck away from this man right now. I ran out of the living room, down the hallway, and into the first bedroom. My sister followed behind me, then my brother. As I was closing the bedroom door, Banks caught up to us and shoved himself against the door to prevent me from locking it. Miraculously, I was able to get it locked before he could overpower me. Once my siblings and I were locked in the bedroom, Banks continued to bang on the door while he repeatedly yelled, "I'm the tickle monster. Let me in now." Both my siblings are hysterically crying at this point, and I'm overcome with the fear of what Banks will do if he manages to gain access to the bedroom, although for my siblings, I try not to show it. There was no landline in this room, and I didn't have a cell phone, but that didn't mean Banks knew that. I yelled back at him, "If you don't stop, I'm going to call the police." Banks backed off, and I heard his footsteps retreat into his bedroom down the hall before he closed the door. My brother, sister, and I stayed in the bedroom with the door locked until my grandma got back. Banks remained in his bedroom for the rest of the night. The following morning, Banks left the house, and my grandma said he'd be gone for the day working. That afternoon, my grandma fell asleep on the living room couch, and for whatever reason, I went into what appeared to be Banks' nightstand, and I found his personal journal. For the most part, it was filled with nonsense and very detailed, drawn depictions of sex. Some of the drawings had a bit of a satanic undertone, but at the time, I was too young to recognize or even really understand what it was I was looking at. I began quickly flipping through it, and I landed on a page with big, bold black and red capital letters. It said, "If you die a virgin, do you go to hell?" Below it was a drawing of a prepubescent nude girl. There were two versions of the girl standing side by side, one where she appears happy and smiley, and the other where her face is more distorted and confused looking. Typing this out and re-envisioning it, it makes me feel disgusting. I don't know how to emphasize just how disturbing it was to see. After seeing these pictures, I remember going numb and just dropping the journal where I stood. I ran to the living room and demanded my grandma to call my parents so we could go home immediately. As a kid, I wasn't exactly sure of how to lay out all the details of what had happened, between the experience with Banks and what I just saw in his journal. So I'm sure to my grandma, it kind of came out of left field that I was demanding to go home. I regret to this day that I didn't lay things out as best as I could, though. The rest of the day before my parents got there to pick us up, it was kind of a blur to me. but I remember as we were walking out, seeing bruises on my sister's arms. I quietly asked her if those were from Banks tickling her. She didn't respond. She just pulled her shirt sleeves down further so that nobody else could see them. My brother, sister, and I don't talk about this outing very much. I think it's something that still has a lot of unpacking to be done. And while I couldn't explain to an adult why we wanted to come home so badly, I think my parents picked up on what we were putting down. They never sent us back to our grandma's, so long as Banks was still there. I, a 25-year-old female, had an experience about 4 days ago that I just haven't been able to shake. I was in the middle of dog/house sitting for my boyfriend while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few acres of property. He's right next to the highway, which has opposite to us a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves. And there are lots of abandoned, dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept ones. A pretty typical countryside neighborhood if you ask me. So I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog/English Lab mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective over me and my own dog, Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other is far from it. Because of his strength, however, I can't walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own, so I usually walk Lottie alone and then go back and get Hennessy to walk with him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important because this happened to be the case 4 nights ago. I was about 75% of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really strange feeling, the kind that comes when you're being watched. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was this tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, rundown home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. I live in inland Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at this time. I forced myself to brush it off though, as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading Let's Not Meet stories and taking in a whole lot of true crime content. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that odd 30-foot distance though. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, he did as well. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was actually following me, that this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel behind me. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too, and had started to bark, growl, and whine. I forced her to keep moving though, and thankfully, we made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door shut, hoping that that would be the end of it. But moments after I got the door locked, I'm still pressed with my back up against it, and I feel someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking because they always do when someone's at the door. There's no peephole on the front door, but I can talk to whoever's on the other side. It's a pretty thin door actually. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the breaks in the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said this was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it. Kind of like he'd rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back no and asked him to please go away. He paused for another second, and then again I heard, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against it. By this point, Hennessy can tell something is wrong, and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he's mashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me, grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going absolutely crazy. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog one more time, and I yell out, "Leave." He paused, and then, with all of his weight, slammed right into the door. I saw the door shake on its hinges, but after that instant, it was quiet for a split second. I took that moment to unlock the door and open it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps towards the man. Well, it's clear that this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled backward, almost falling over and cursing as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me, and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. I managed to yank Hennessy back in, and I called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never got a good look at the guy, and they basically told me there wasn't really anything they could do. But they did take my statement and told me they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. I just want to say that I'm so thankful for Hennessy. After all of this, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night and cried because it had all hit me of just how terrifying that was, plus the adrenaline dump. I went out the next day and bought Henny the biggest treat that I could find at a pet store because he'd clearly earned it. I also got Lottie a little something too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had 2 dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize he was hearing 2 sets of barks. Or he assumed that if I had 2 dogs, they were both like my fluffy poodle. That is to say, he clearly wasn't afraid. That is, until the door opened. I'm so thankful the guy didn't have a weapon, and looking back now, I probably should have just called the cops and kept my door closed. But I hope that maybe because he saw Hennessy, he'll know not to come back and mess with us. Because if he does, this big sweet boy is going to rip his arm off. Before I launch into my story, I just want to say I'm aware of how dumb it is to do stuff like this, and I probably won't be doing this for a long time after what happened a few months back. Anyway, I just really wanted to share this because I don't know who else to tell. About 6 months ago, I had the scariest experience of my life. For background, I'm a dumb teenage boy who sneaks out every now and then just to walk around at night. I find something very peaceful about walking around after dark, but my parents have never let me stay out past sunset. So for about a year, whenever school gets hard or just life in general gets stressful, I sneak out and walk around for about an hour or 2. Anyway, the night that I'm going to reference began with me deciding to go for another 2 a.m. ritual walk. I grabbed a sweatshirt, got my shoes on once I was outside my back door, and hopped the backyard fence to freedom. After I was safely away from my neighborhood, I took one of my usual routes, which is cutting through another neighborhood and walking onto a winding road, where I then walk down the middle of it and head towards a circle of shops and fast food restaurants. I was probably there for a solid chunk of time just walking in the loop and ending up sitting on a bench. At some point, I picked up a plastic spoon off the ground and started to grind it against the pavement. This was out of sheer boredom until the spoon part was half gone. After killing a little bit more time, I was chilling there for a while before I decided to walk around a tiny bit more, and I eventually ended up at a park like 10 minutes away from my neighborhood. This is a spot where I usually finish off my night by just staring off into the sky. The park itself gives me the chills sometimes at night because there's a huge ring of trees surrounding all sides of you, and anyone could be watching you from the woods. This is the point where it starts to get real. I'm laying on one of those table-bench combos while I'm staring up into existence feeling like a philosopher when I hear an old man whistle. I remember shooting straight up because I had never had any other human interaction while on these walks. And that's when I see an old man dimly illuminated by a streetlight by the entrance of the park. Now, I had seen this guy before. He's this tall, skinny white guy that walks around our town all day, and I would honestly think he was homeless if he wasn't wearing a different fancy button-up shirt and clean cargo pants every day. Me and my mom have actually talked about him, and we think he's mentally disabled and likely lives with a caretaker. I had a singular interaction with him one time. About a year ago, I was walking home in broad daylight when I passed the man, who was at that time sitting on a bench. Dude just looks up at me and says, "Jesus loves you," with this weird little smirk on his face. I responded with an awkward, "I know," even though I'm an atheist, because what else do you really say in that situation? Anyway, back to the park at night. I just stare at this guy across the empty parking lot, likely way longer than I should have because he was already creeping me the hell out. I imagine we were locked in the staring contest for a long time before he slowly starts making his way towards me. And at this moment, I'm frozen in fear because why the f is this old geezer out with me at like 3 a.m. in an empty park? I'm standing up now when he gets close to me and he gives me this cheeky grin, like he knows something I don't yet. And I'm still just gawking at him like a fucking buffoon. Have you ever scoffed at a book or movie when the main character is frozen in fear? I know I have, and I never will again because I'm more frozen than I've ever been in my life at this moment. At some point, after maybe 10 or 15 seconds of awkward standing, he just kind of half pats and half grabs my shoulder before reaching into his pocket to pull out a plastic spoon. Yeah, that same plastic spoon that I was holding about an hour ago at the shop plaza. He tucks it into my front sweatshirt pocket, and I guess something about that act makes my mind snap out of frozen because I book it to the public restroom before locking the door behind me. I'm now in this dimly lit bathroom in the middle of the night, and I'm guessing at this time that it was likely past 3. I assumed that maybe he would leave once he saw me in my state of panic, but honestly, I don't think he ever left. I ended up looking closer at the plastic spoon, and it was altered, even beyond my grinding. Have you ever seen that viral AI-generated image where it looks completely normal at a glance, but you can't identify a single thing? If not, just search up, name one thing in this image. Now, imagine that, except a word carved onto a plastic spoon that you can't read, or even identify any of the characters. I think I sat in that locked bathroom for over half an hour, just contemplating every single decision I've made in my life that led me to this exact nightmare moment. To be clear, I had no phone or any way of contacting someone because my parents installed Life 360 on my phone, and they can see my location whenever they want. I also had no watch or access to the outside to tell the time. I ended up gaining the courage to unlock the door and just absolutely rocket myself towards the exit of the park. Before I turned the corner, I looked back for a split second and saw a figure sitting on the bench that was right next to the bathroom. Apparently, this old man had waited outside for an hour just to see me one more time. I'm being completely honest when I say I held a full sprint until I got back to my neighborhood, where I finally caught my breath behind a bush and then snuck back into my house. I haven't gone out at night since this experience, and I don't know if I'll ever sneak out again. This has seemingly scared me straight. I still have the spoon buried somewhere in my wardrobe, but I haven't looked at it in months. Sometimes I think about how long he was following me for, and if this itself was an isolated incident, or if he had been stalking me on other late night trips as well. I would love to hear your guys' opinion on the matter, unless you're here to lecture me about my actions because, trust me, I've already learned. I won't be doing this again. My mom still lives in the house that I was born and raised in, which is also where I had my very own creepy encounter. I'm 39 now, and the event I'll be describing occurred when I was 26. I visit my mom at her house often to check in and visit. On Sundays, we cook or bake and chat. On one particular Sunday, my mom mentioned she had borrowed a pan from her next-door neighbor, who I'll be referring to as Nora. Nora had been my mom's next-door neighbor for as long as I'd been alive. Nora lived with her husband in that home up until they got divorced around the year 2000. My mom was busy trying to prepare a meal, so I offered to take the pan back to Nora. As I approached Nora's home, I noticed her car in the driveway. The back passenger tire was flat, and the inside of the car was a complete disaster. Since her divorce, Nora had become more reclusive, and I had not actually seen her in about a year, though my mom spoke about her interactions with her from time to time. I noticed the front window shades of the house were closed as I knocked on her door. I waited a reasonable amount of time before knocking again and ringing the doorbell this time, after getting no answer the first time. Following the doorbell ring, I heard something faint come from inside of the house. It sounded like a dog whining, then some shuffling, but it sounded far off. I listened for a little while and then knocked again, this time also calling out, "Nora, I brought your pan back." I thought maybe Nora wasn't feeling up to talking with anyone, but I also had this really weird feeling as I stood out on her porch. I kept thinking I heard shuffling inside and had this weird sense that someone was right on the other side of that door. Getting a little uneasy, I knocked one more time and called out, but nothing. Unsure of what to do, I left the pan on Nora's doorstep and I walked back to my mom's house. Once back inside, I described what happened to my mom and the weird feeling that I got, but my mother didn't seem particularly concerned and said that Nora would often stay inside her house without talking to anyone for weeks at a time. About 3 hours later, after having finished cooking, my mom and I were in her front yard looking at her garden. She was fussing around picking at weeds when I heard Nora's garage door open. There was a pretty large tree between my mom's and Nora's property, so I couldn't really get a good view of the door opening. But a few moments later, I saw a dark blue SUV backing out of her driveway and turning in a way that meant it would be driving past my mom's house. I never knew Nora to have an SUV, so I couldn't help but look as the car started driving past my mom's house. As it did, I saw that the driver's side window was rolled down, and a 30-ish-year-old male was driving. As he drove past, the man stared absolute daggers at my mom and myself. I asked my mom if she knew who that was. She told me that she didn't know his name, but that he had been staying with Nora for a couple of weeks now, and that he was kind of weird. She didn't see him glaring because she was messing around with the weeds, but again, I had that unsettled feeling settle down over me, although I just figured that Nora wasn't feeling like opening the door that day. Fast forward about 2 weeks, and I got a call from my mom while I was at work one afternoon. She left a voicemail, and when I heard the message, my stomach nearly fell out of my backside. Her voice was kind of shaky, as she told me that Nora had been reported as a missing person by some out-of-state family. I found out later that local police had enough information to force entry into her home. Inside, they found evidence to suggest someone had been gravely injured there. Testing would later reveal that blood found in the home belonged to Nora, and according to police, there was a lot of it. Also missing from the house was Nora's golden retriever Bo. Through various interviews and bank statements, the police investigation uncovered that the man who I'd seen leaving her house that day had spent tens of thousands of dollars from her savings account. Going further down the line here, the guy had allegedly admitted to his wife that he had murdered Nora and hid her body. He was convicted of this, and part of his plea deal stated that he had to reveal where he buried her, though he still hasn't to this day. Undoubtedly, the worst part for Nora's family is that this guy was supposed to be in prison when he took her life. He'd somehow been mistakenly released early on drug trafficking and possession charges. I sincerely feel like that creepy was watching me through Nora's peephole as I knocked on her door that day. I'll never know if she was already gone at that point, but I swear I heard her dog whining inside that day too. It still creeps me out to no end when I think of that day, and as I wonder what he was thinking when he drove past us in my mom's garden.